But back in 1972, in fact, the spring of 1972, here in Boca Raton, there was a man who went into the bank building on Palmetto Park Road, 150 East Palmetto. It's the Bank of America now. It used to be First Bank and Trust. Some of you have worked there or banked there. That building's been there. It's the same building. And before interstate banking and a lot of things, you had to go to the bank in which your checks were. You know, people don't understand, young people, that back then you banked at one location. You remember that, older people like me? I've only gone to 2 banks in my life, 2 places where I bank. It's interesting. Now you do it on the internet. But back then you had to go. He wrote a check for $25,000 and cashed it. And the purpose of this, cashing this check right down the street, was to pay off 5 people to rob 2 locations. They were going to rob 2 places. One was in March and one was in mid-June. I don't remember the exact place of the one in March. It's important, but not for today. But the one in June was an office building that they went in and they wanted to steal some files in this office building, just petty theft. These guys knew what they were doing. They were Cuban nationals who had moved here, and they were paid $25,000, I presume $5,000 each, I have no idea, but they were paid in 1972. If you remember 1972, for those of you who lived here or were alive, it was a very rough year. That was the year that Richard Nixon was trying to get out of Vietnam. We don't do well in land wars in Asia, and Vietnam was one of those land wars we were not doing well, and he was spending all his efforts with Henry Kissinger. You remember that whole story? It's history for these people up here, but it was reality, and there's some guys in here who went to Vietnam, and they were working on getting us out of Vietnam. There was also the race issues that they were working on, and then there was a political campaign in 1972. So all this was going on, and meanwhile, there was this robbery that went on. Nobody thought anything of the robbery. Well, that robbery is the most important robbery that has occurred in the history of the United States. I have no reason to know why, except this, that those 5 Cubans went into a building on the Potomac. The building's name was Watergate. And they stole some things that was very insignificant, by the way. That was in June of 1972. Nobody thought much of it. And most people didn't even know about it during the June of 1972 because everybody was worrying about these other big issues. But at the end, by the end of the year of 1972, they had been caught. I think they were filmed on the closed circuit. I think a guard might have found them. I was doing some reading on it this week to remind me. I read all the books when they came out, but I forgot that part of the story. But they were found. All roads led to the White House. Now, why would the White House want to do a petty theft at the Democratic National Committee's office in Watergate? Well, that's for another day to figure that one out. But here's what happened. As that thing started coming together, it was now March of 1973. Dates are important. March 21st, 1973. 10 of the most powerful people in the world, non-elected, got together in a room and said, we got to cover this thing up. It was Hunt, Dean, Haldeman, Ehrlichman, John Mitchell, Chuck Colson, and 4 other men whose names I can't remember, who got together and said, we've got to protect the most powerful man in the world. March 21, 1973. April 8, 1973, that's 17 or 18 days later, the whole cover-up blew up. Every one of those men, at one point or another, said it was a lie. The cover-up, to cover up the most powerful man in the world, only lasted 2 weeks. 2 weeks. And every one of them, some of them went to jail, most of them were ruined. Chuck Colson, of course, went to jail and he didn't even have to go to jail, by the way. He became a Christian after he was caught, and the judge was going to let him off, and he said, no, I did it. You got to give me what I'm due. And he went to jail because he was a Christian. But do you get the story here? The story is this, that the most powerful people in the world could keep a secret for 18 days. A plot to protect the president. There is a belief that has been going around for hundreds and hundreds of years that the disciples brought together a plot after Christ was crucified to say that he rose from the dead. And that plot has been perpetrated, so they say, for the last 2,000 years. Now think about it. These 10 guys at the White House could make a phone call and have a jet waiting for them, or a helicopter to go to the jet, in 20 minutes. It was interesting. They could call the National Gallery of Art and have masterpieces put on their walls of their office. They could have a meal any time of the day. They could have anything they wanted, and they couldn't keep a secret. Now, these 12 or 11 disciples had nothing. They were in a conquered land. They were poor. They didn't even live in Jerusalem. Most of them were from Galilee, correct? They weren't even from that area. They were from the rural part of the north. And yet, not one of them recanted. Not one recanted. Why? Well, some would say they were mistaken. Some would say they perpetuated a myth, like the myths of the Middle East. And some would say they perpetuated a plot. Or they perpetuated the truth. It's only one of those four options. They were mistaken, it was a myth, it was a plot, or it was the truth. And how you believe what I just said determines your future. We can argue about baptism. We can argue, do you pour, do you dunk, do you sprinkle? We can argue, do you do it when you're a baby, do you do it when you're an adult? I'll argue all those things all day long. But you can't argue about this one. Either you believe it or you don't.